We are in the life of Paul. We are in Acts chapter 17. Just as a brief recap, and we need to because what's about to happen is that actually from the first part of the second missionary journey, everything seemed to be going okay, at least from what we could tell, except that of when they try to go into Asia, when they try to go into Bithynia. They cannot, they're not allowed, the Holy Spirit doesn't allow them. They go to Macedonia, and they go to Macedonia because of what we call the Macedonian call. And it is a vision that Paul had. Now, as we have made mention before, just because there's an open door does not mean everything is going to be easy, and it's not, because we have 3 cities going to, in every place there's a problem. Philippi, they're there for a bit, and things seem to go very well until they are thrown into prison, and then they will leave Philippi. They go to Thessalonica. Thessalonica, things look like it's going very well there, but you have the Jews there that they're unbelieving. They are against the Word of God. They're against the gospel being preached there. And so they leave Thessalonica. They go to Berea. Berea is a better place. Things are going quite well in Berea. They have more of a noble mind, or they're more reasonable there. They check the Scriptures to make sure that what's being taught is true. But those of Thessalonica come to Berea, and they cause problems there. And they may very well have killed Paul if they had found him, but they didn't find him. And so there are some local men, Jason being one named, that they have to pay a fee, as it were, or a bond, as it were. They have to pay that, and then Paul is sent away. Timothy and Silas will stay in Berea. They're going to stay in Berea, but they're getting Paul out of town. And Paul is being accompanied. And they are going to take him to the coast, which is really just a short trip to the coast, about 20 miles. And they're at the coast. And there are those who conduct Paul, that's verse 15, they bring him to Athens. So there is the sense, though we don't know it, there is the sense that he didn't choose Athens. That's where they conducted him. But it could be that that's where he wanted to go. Now, he tells them, the men who brought him there, because it's a 250-mile trip from the coast where they had been at Berea, and Berea is not on the coast, but they have to go to the coast. They have to, from there, sailing to Athens is about a 250-mile trip. On a good day, you can expect it to be, and this would be like everything is fair weathered, everything is nice, got a good wind. You can expect about a 17 to 18 hour trip on a ship to get you there. Unless, and if there were stops, but it doesn't say. Okay. And so they conduct him to Athens, and then he tells them, here's the message to Silas and Timothy, get here as quickly as you can. It's with all speed, he tells them. Now, we just have to, in this, there's some things about travel in the first century that we need to pay attention to. And also some things about Paul as well at this time. All right, we asked the question, why was... I get it, why he would be conducted out of Berea into the coast. I understand that. These are men that are helping him get out of Berea, and they're going to protect him. And as we said last week, they could be members of the church, or they just could be trusted men to do it. They take him to the coast. But here's the thing. Why did they board the ship as well? Why did they get on the ship and go to take the journey to Athens and then go back? Why did they do that? It seems to me like, wouldn't it be enough that they just see him to the ship and see him off, and now he's safe? The men of Thessalonica can't get to him now. He's off at sea, and he's going a distance. And while it's 250 miles by sea, I do believe it'd be further by land to get there. But the question is, why did they take him all the way to Athens? Well, that's a valid question, and there could be several reasons for that. Some of them rather mundane. It could be that they were going to Athens anyway. I mean, it's possible that they were. We don't know. It's also possible that, and this is where I lean, is that it's possible that the ship wasn't exactly safe for Paul, and that they stayed there to help him and protect him on that ship. That's how I lean. That they may have considered it unsafe for him to be on board, and they would keep him there. But they obviously believe he's safe once he's in Athens. Okay? They obviously believe that because they leave him. Now, it's also possible, I will give this possibility, that physically he may not have been able to have done it by himself. But if that's the case, that would if that's the case, it would be a temporary condition, because he's a traveler. You know, he goes a lot of places, and he has to be pretty well healthy to be able to do these things. You know, Silas and Timothy don't have to pack him around, and he would be would appear to be a very healthy man. So I don't think they were there because physically he couldn't do it by himself. I just don't believe that. But if it were the case, it would have been a temporary thing. Now, we have said that to come to this. So let's just read verse 15. So Acts 17, verse 15. So those who conducted Paul brought him to Athens, and receiving a command for Silas and Timothy to come to him with all speed, they departed. So those who conducted him there are not there for very long. And he tells them, get Silas and Timothy, or have them come as quickly as they can. Now here's the thing. While he's in Athens, they will not be there. He's in Athens alone. And notice the next verse. Now while Paul waited for them at Athens, his spirit was provoked within him when he saw that the city was given over to idols. Okay, so he's waiting, and then we get to verse 17. Therefore he reasoned in the synagogue and in the marketplace daily. Okay, now that would mean in verse 16, while he's waiting for Paul, while Paul is waiting for Silas and Timothy, he's in a holding pattern. He's not going to the synagogue. He's not going into the marketplace to teach. Why? Can we ask that question? Why wouldn't he be? We've already answered the question. The answer is Philippi, Thessalonica, Berea. What happened in all those places? In every one of those places, there was trouble, and in every one of those places, he had help. He had at least Silas and Timothy. He had them. Now he doesn't have, he's by himself. If something were to happen to him, there's no one to be there with him. He could end up in being beaten and thrown into jail, like happened in Thessalonica. It could be, like happened in Philippi. In Thessalonica, they had a mob after him, and I think the intent was to kill him. They couldn't find him. Okay, and then the same thing occurs in Berea, but it's the men of Thessalonica coming there and causing the same problem in Berea. So he has to just wait. That's why he's waiting.
17, the next verse says, so he reasoned in the
That's
spirit.
correct. That's exactly correct. As we read in verse 16, his spirit was provoked within him when he saw the city given over to idols. Therefore, this is why he did it. He wasn't doing it already. He was waiting. While Paul waited for them in Athens, his spirit was provoked. So he's waiting for them. Now, how long would it take for them to get there if they came with all speed? Well, it would take for the sailing back, we'll give them 18 hours sailing back, so that's a day. Then they have to go all the way back to Berea, which is another 20 miles, and that's by road. Then the message has to be given to them, and how long is it going to take for them to part? So they got to do the journey all the way back. Well, he's been waiting on them, and he just can't be quiet. He sees a city given over to idolatry. Now, we're just going to say this and this is something we have been saying. This is something we have been saying, that whoever wrote Acts, and we know who it was Luke who wrote Acts. He is in a portion of this book. He's not here now, but we last saw him in Philippi. That's the last place where he was. Did he stay there? Did he leave somewhere else? We don't know where he went. But that's the last place where he was. Now, here is Paul in Athens, and he sees, what does he see in this? It's given over to idols. Now, you have skeptics who will say the book of Acts was written well after the fact, and it's completely fiction. But whoever wrote this book has got things down accurately with every place they go. Is it a fact that Athens was given over to idolatry? Is it a fact that they had temples and shrines and things like that all over the place? And the answer to that is yes. Even to this day, you can see remnants of it. To this day, that's where the Acropolis is. The Acropolis stands in Athens. And there's another thing that's also going to be brought up, and that is the Areopagus, or Mars Hill. That too is not a fictitious place in Athens. That's a prominent place in Athens, and that is historically accurate, because that is where you would go to have an audience. That is where you would go if you were going to have a crowd that wanted to discuss or to listen to somebody. Okay, now we see verse 17. Therefore, because the Spirit is provoked, he has been waiting on them, but they're not coming. And in fact, as we just said a moment ago, they're not going to meet him in Athens. He's going to move on. They're going to meet him in Corinth. Now, how they find him, that's a first century thing. Because unless he's able to send messengers back or leave somebody there, leave word for them there, I'm not sure how that's done. But they don't go to Athens. He's there on his own. And it's not until 18 and verse 5, when Silas and Timothy had come from Macedonia, okay, they hadn't left Macedonia. Athens is not Macedonia. Berea is. That is Macedonia. Now, so we go to verse 17, so 17. Therefore he reasoned in the synagogue with the Jews and with the Gentile worshipers. So he's doing precisely what he has been doing. This is the strategy. Go where? First, wherever the Jews are. And you know on the Sabbath, they're going to meet somewhere. In Philippi, there's not a synagogue. It's just women there, Jewish women, and it's at the river. And so he discovers where they're meeting, and that's where they go to talk to them. Here in Athens, there is a synagogue, once again, historically accurate. There is a synagogue, and he goes there to reason with the Jews. And we can just as well think that the the sermon that he gives there is going to be basically the same thing that he's been giving as he goes. It'd be the introductory sermon that he gives. If we go back to chapter 13, where he's in Antioch of Pisidia, we have that first sermon of Paul's recorded for us, the first one recorded, not his first one, but the first one recorded for us, and it is like an introductory thing for your average synagogue. Okay, so that's probably what he's doing there. I think it's pretty good bet, not a bet, but a pretty good guarantee that's what he's doing. But he's not just in the synagogue. If you're going to the synagogue, you can only, if you're going to speak to a group, you're going to have to go on the Sabbath. Otherwise, there won't be that many people there, if anybody's there. I mean, who knows? But on any other day, there wouldn't be very many people there. But on the Sabbath, there would be. That's where they're going to be. And in the marketplace daily. So he's there every day with those who happen to be there. So you would have, obviously, Gentiles would be there, and there would be Jews that would be there. And he would speak to anybody who happens to be there. And there would be foreigners who were there, not just Athenians, not just those who were born and raised there, but it would be foreigners as well who would be in the marketplaces. And this is given opportunities. And so he's doing this by himself, and there is a risk involved in it, because of the current pattern that has happened with Philippi, Thessalonica, and Berea. But it's not going to happen here. It's not going to happen in Athens. In Athens, he's not going to be threatened, or it doesn't. We're not given that, and they don't send him to the magistrates. We're not given that either. Okay, so he's been doing this. Now in Athens, there are some individuals, these would be schools of thought. And everybody, okay, let's just say this. Everybody has a philosophy. Everybody has their own worldview. And hopefully your worldview comes from the Bible, because that's going to give you the accurate worldview. This is the way you are to view everything. Everything from what creation is to humanity, to our past, to our future, all of that. And also how we are to live our lives. Now, if you don't have that, you're going to either develop your own or borrow somebody else's. All right, you have two schools of thought that happen to be in Athens. That doesn't mean all of Athens is either one or the other. It's not. This would just be a group of individuals. And in Athens, not the whole population. Verse 18, then certain Epicurean and Stoic philosophers encountered him. That would be in the marketplace. They would have heard bits and pieces of this in the marketplace. And so they're interested. What does this babbler, and some said, verse 18, and some said, what does this babbler want to say? Others said, he seems to be a proclaimer of foreign gods because he preached to them Jesus and the resurrection. Okay, so now we know some of what he's been teaching in the marketplaces. Now we know he would be teaching that in the synagogue because we've already seen it. But here you have these two schools of thought, the Epicureans and the Stoics. And they're interested. What does this babbler want to say? We'll get to that in just a second. Let's talk about these two schools of thought, because they, once again, are historically accurate. Someone who is going to fake this would have to do a lot of research to know that in Athens one would have found these schools of thought. One would have had to have known quite a bit of Greek history to have known you would encounter them in Athens at this time. So you have the Epicureans, and we have people who are Epicureans today, they just don't know it. Or maybe they do know it. An Epicurean basically says that whatever makes me happy is good. That's in essence what it says. Whatever makes me happy is good. It's a very selfish sort of approach, obviously. But it would be if partying makes me happy, if getting ahead in cheating in business makes me happy, whatever it is that makes me happy, that is good. I mean, that's just boiling it down. Enjoy yourself while you're here, because soon things are going to get rough and there's death. Okay, but while you can, enjoy what you got. All right, enjoy it to the full, and that means toss out a lot of stuff. You're going to have to toss out a lot of stuff along the way. Okay. Now the Stoics, on the other hand, Stoics were very different. The Stoics had, where we would call them a little bit more mature, in that they did not believe that whatever made you happy is good. They well understood that, just like with in the book of Ecclesiastes. All right, so you've enjoyed yourself, so you've had a great time. What's the end of it? Where does it get you? It got you nowhere. Where do you actually end up? In the same place. You've not advanced. You've not done anything. You haven't really helped yourself. You've just been diverted for a little bit. Then that's the amount of it. That's all there is. The Stoics had a different view of things, and that they very well understood, and so did the Epicureans. They very well understood life can be hard, and life can seem to be unfair. Life can throw you some things that you did not plan for, you did not think about. You know, these things happen to somebody else, but they don't happen to me. They happen to some people, but they don't happen to me. They can't happen to me, and here it is. Okay, it happened to you. With them, it's to take all of this with, well, a stern face and with nobility of heart, and just face the storms of life as best you can. Okay? It's going to happen, and just brace yourself for it. And that's, now both of these come to a bitter end. Both of these come to the grave. Neither one of them can bring you to anything other than, and that's the end of your life. None of them can do anything beyond that. Now, both of these were from earlier philosophers. Epicurus is where they get the name Epicurean. The Stoics, I forgot who started that, but this goes back a distance. And so these things continue on in Athens. Now, they say, what does this babbler want to say? Now, if I said that to you, I said, well, what does this babbler want to say? Would you think I just complimented you? No, and neither did they. Okay, neither, and that's what you're saying about me. Oh, there he is, the babbler. But no, it's not. It's not a compliment. Now, I'm reading from the New King James. You may be reading from a different rendering of this, because there are different renderings of it. And it literally means seed picker. And there is different ways to interpret that. There are different ways to interpret that. One is someone who goes about picking up a seed here, a seed there, a seed there, a seed there, and just putting it in a bag. okay, just collecting seeds. That would be collecting ideas, and what you have at the end is just a mishmash of ideas. That's what you have. You took a little bit of this doctrine, a little bit of that philosophy, a little bit of this teaching or understanding, an idea here, an idea there. You put it in your bag, and you come up with this conglomerate. You come up with this mix of things, and that is one way to look at it. Now, he's a babbler. He's picked up ideas from all over the place. Who knows? Okay. There's another way to look at it, and it too is not a good one. And that would be because being a seed picker, no matter how you look at it, really is not, they're not complimenting him at all. It's not like, oh, well, you know, here's an original thinker. It wouldn't be that at all. It would be, he's just gathered things up. But the other interpretation of that is just this kind of idle person who is living off of scraps. All right, that would be another way to look at him. And I don't know what condition he may have been in Athens, but that might reflect some things on how they view him. Here is this foreigner who's come in. It's obvious he's a foreigner. Here's a foreigner who has come in, and while he does speak Greek, it does not look like, you know, what does he do for a living? Now that is a possibility too. I'm not throwing out any of these as being impossible, but that's a possibility as well. But what we want to bring away with is they weren't looking up to him. They were just curious as to what he had to say. They were curious. And the text is going to tell us why they were curious. Because that's kind of the habit of everyday life in Athens. And something new comes into town, something new happens, they want to hear about it. Some new thought, some new something, they want to hear about it so they can tell about it. All right, that's was the culture in Athens. But let's get to this. All right, so he's proclaiming to them Jesus and the resurrection. So they've heard some things. Some of them have heard some things about this, and they're interested. All right, they've heard about this guy in the marketplace, and so, verse 19, they took him and brought him to the Areopagus. Once again, this is a literal place in Athens. Translate that, Mars Hill is where it is. Okay, Mars, that's the god of war. There's a place there that they called Mars Hill, and that was a place where they would hold courts if they were holding courts on a particular time. That's also where there could be, it's a large open area, and there was nothing built there. It's a large open area. And so, but it also had a scenic, kind of a scenic overlook of much of the city that's there. And from what I've been told, and those who I know who have been to Athens, that if you were to stand on Mars Hill, in fact, you could wave with your arm and say, you know, here are all these temples. You know, look at all these temples, all these shrines. You can see them from right here. Now, they took him and brought him to the Areopagus, saying, "May we know what this new doctrine is of which you speak?" So this is different. He's being invited by Gentiles, not Gentiles going to a synagogue, but these are Gentiles. These are followers of Greek philosophy, because both the Epicureans and Stoics, those are from Greek philosophers, and they want to know what he's saying. So they're not putting him on trial. They're not persecuting him. They want to know. But I'm going to tell you, with most of it, it's a shallow interest. It's just a point of, well, it talked about diverting. It would just be diverting, is all it would be. It would just be entertainment to them, to hear something new. Because it's going to to continue on in this. For you are bringing some strange things to our ears. Therefore, we want to know what these things mean. All right, there's strange things we're picking up. We need to go deeper in this. We want to know what they mean. Now, he's going to tell them what it means. But he can't go deep into the Old Testament because he'd lose them quick. He can't start talking about Moses because few of them would have known much about Moses. Some of them would have, obviously. I'm quite certain of that. They would have, because for 260 years by this point, 260 years, the Old Testament would have been in Greek. It would have been Koine Greek. All right, it would have been available in a place like Athens. So they would have known some things, but he can't really count on that they would be fully adept in the Old Testament, or that they would fully understand all the prophets. So he's got to start by explaining some things, starting by what they actually understand, and then going from there. We want to hear what these things mean. Now we get the explanation why this is the case. For all the Athenians and the foreigners who were there spent their time in nothing else but either to tell or to hear some new thing. Now, this sounds almost like they're after, hear or to tell some new thing. This sounds like, they want gossip. But clearly what they're after is not gossip. Clearly what they're after is they want to know what the doctrine is. And it would be just an interest. And probably, in my mind, because of verse 21, it'd be a shallow type of interest. That they want to be able to tell others, their friends or whomever, what they have learned and who this fellow is. And the fact that they call him a seed picker or a babbler, while that is not complimentary, they obviously don't think he's a madman, a lunatic, or just some uneducated person. Just your basic homeless man who doesn't know a whole lot of anything. They know he's educated. They can hear it from him, no doubt, by his use of Greek and by his manner. They would know, and they would never have invited him up there if they just saw in him some we'll just say hayseed, some guy that just wandered in from the wilderness and is not very educated and not very articulate or anything like that. They respect something about him in order to invite him there to hear what he has to say. And evidently, the message that they heard was enough for them to know this is deeper than we thought. This is not just a madman who's out here babbling something. All right? They are hearing something. They're hearing concerning Jesus and the resurrection. Okay, that's interesting. And what foreign gods? What is all this about? They don't know. Okay, so he is invited there. Now, we have Paul's second recorded sermon given to us in the book of Acts. Now, once again, so we clarify for everyone watching or here, that doesn't mean this is his second sermon ever. There's no telling how many sermons the man has done by this time in his life. How many sermons had he done before he even went on the first missionary journey? We don't know. But this is the second one recorded in the book of Acts. Otherwise, we just have some bits and pieces that this is they taught in the synagogue and they were invited back for 2 more Sabbaths, okay? Or they were invited back to the next Sabbath. We don't know precisely what was said, word for word. But we have an example, and I think this is why these two are given. Chapter 13, he's in a synagogue. This was his approach to the Jews and to the believing Gentiles who happened to be there. All right? They would have been familiar with Old Testament passages and with the prophets. That's chapter 13. Chapter 17, he's dealing with pagans. Educated pagans, but pagans. They don't know the prophets. If he started quoting Deuteronomy, they wouldn't know what he's quoting at all. But he is going to quote something, and they will know that. He is going to quote something, and it's not a prophet, it's a poet. And he says, one of your own poets. He's going to quote him. But in this sermon, he cannot start with Abraham. I don't know who that is. Or if they did, it would just be extremely loose. Oh, he has something to do with the Jews, right? They would be extremely loose, and he definitely could not address them as our fathers, or talk about our fathers in times past, because their fathers were very different than his and those Jews in the synagogue. They're very different. And so he starts from where they understand. And the first thing he says actually is a compliment, and going into why he's going to tell them what he's going to tell them. Because he starts in this way. Verse 22. Then Paul stood in the midst of the Areopagus and said, Men of Athens, I perceive that in all things you are very religious. Now that's a compliment. And they would take that as a compliment. That you are, I perceive. So this is, from my stay here, this is my opinion. From what I have gathered while being in this city, this is what I have gathered. You are very religious. Now, let's just go over his outline first, and then we're going to go verse by verse. And we can't get through the whole sermon today. But we're going to go through his outline, and this is basically what he's covering. He's going to begin his address and saying, you're religious. Then he tells them, I'm going to declare the God you would want to worship, or you have actually been trying to worship. So this isn't a foreign thing to them, and this isn't something they haven't wanted to do. He's going to bring up that I have seen this shrine to the unknown God. I'm going to declare Him, the one you want to worship without knowing. I'm going to declare Him to you. This is the one, because this brings them in of, oh, yeah, okay. So, because this does bring them into all this, that this isn't just, okay, let's just say this. If he were to bring something that they had shown absolutely no interest in, he would have to start from a different beginning. He'd have to start from it. And if this were something that they were unconcerned with or had, or even despised, then it's going to be extremely difficult. But he's showing you do have an interest in this. One, you are religious. Number two, you have a shrine here to a God you know nothing about. Let me tell you about Him. That is a great introduction. And of course, it's not Paul. He's an inspired speaker. It's the Holy Spirit. So they are being brought into this, of this is what you have wanted to do. Let me help you in this. All right, now he goes from there in God created us. He created us. He doesn't need us to create anything for Him. And that's going to be logic. He's using logic in this. that if God created all things and they would agree with that, there's not a single thing they would disagree. Because with the Epicureans and the Stoics and Greeks in general, now there were Greeks that were atheists. Yes, they're atheists all the way in David's day. And there would have been atheists, though I cannot prove it, before the flood. I can prove it in David's day because he talks about it. The fool has said in his heart, there is no God. All right, and that's 14, and it's in 14 I got in mind, but it's in 2 Psalms that he says that. Now, they would agree, yes, deity, we can disagree on the name, on who it was, but deity created the world and all things. They understood that. They knew that. And we have also brought up that there were those among the pagans, well, living among the Greeks, among the Romans, among others, who had already come to conclusions of, if these gods created us, or if these gods are all powerful, why do we treat them like pets? All right, why are they helpless? Why do we have to do these things for them? Why do we have to carve their images out of stone or wood or whatever? Why do we have to do this? Why, if they're so powerful, why can't they fend for themselves? Before this was carved into this image of whomever, it was just a rock we brought in. It's a rock that was quarried, brought in, and it was a worthless rock. Now we worship this rock. They already, through time, you have individuals who are coming to those conclusions. They're coming to those conclusions. Not everybody did, but they're coming to that. And that is why every place we have seen, whether it is in the first missionary journey or the second missionary journey, when they go into the synagogues, who do they also see? Gentiles. Every single one of them. Now, in Philippi, I'm not sure that's the case. They weren't in a synagogue. They were by the river. But there always seems to be Greeks, that would be Gentiles, who are there with them. They have come to these conclusions. Now, he starts off in this way, and so he then continues that there are huge things in humanity, huge things that have taken place in human history, and that God was involved in all of that. He was involved in all that. He created us all. From one blood came all peoples. That means from one set of parents came all peoples. Now, they might not have agreed with that. I don't know. I think they would have, though. It's hard to tell. But they would have understood, yeah, we're created by deity. They would have understood that. And that there is a pre-appointed time. Okay, they can understand that. There are boundaries of nations. They would understand that. God has been behind it all. He's behind that. And then we exist and live because of Him. And that, I'm sorry, I skipped one. He's always wanted us to seek Him. Always. No matter the century. He's always wanted us to seek Him. And it's not very far. He's not far from us. We exist and live because of Him. Then he quotes a line from a poem one of your own poets also said. Okay? One of your own poets have said, "For we are also His offspring." And he's quoting the poem Phenomena, and it's written by Aratus of Soli, and he lived from 315 to 245 BC. So this would be a very old poem. They would have known it. He's quoting it for them. They would have known that poem. And matter of fact, we have translations of that poem. That's how I know the name of it. The text here does not tell us what the name is, but that is the poem. And so he's using one of their own poets, who that even a pagan poet can get some things correct. I mean, even a pagan poet can do it. It's like they always said about the broken clock. It's right twice a day at least. I mean, that's all. But he can quote, and he's making a point. Now we come to, all right, what's to be done because of all this? What's to be done? And he tells them, God calls for repentance of all men. And then he tells them why. Because there is judgment, and he brings in the subject of the resurrection. That Jesus, the judge, has been shown to be approved by God because God raised him from the dead. All right, and that's going to be the end of his sermon, not necessarily because that's the conclusion, the absolute conclusion. Maybe it was, but they begin to balk at that one. It's the resurrection. It's the subject of the resurrection. Up until that point, they're following, okay, they evidently don't have a problem with it. But when it comes to the resurrection, then suddenly they falter. But, all right, we have come to an end this morning. Next week, we're going to go verse by verse of what he says. We've done an outline and shown the direction that he's taking, because it's a logical direction. The direction he goes, every step of the way, there's a reason he is giving it. And he is walking a precise path, if you will, to help these Gentiles. And that's precisely what some of them understand, because some of them will want to hear more, but some of them also are going to stay with him. They like what they hear. And while others, it's, okay, I mean, okay, fun is fun, and it's over. Yes, ma'am?
On verse 22, in the King James it says they're very...
Superstitious. Yes, that is correct. What the question is, or the statement is, in verse 22, the Old King James does say, I perceive that in all things you are very superstitious. Now, that is another way of rendering that word into English. That is true. And it's possible it was meant that way. It was possible. But I take it more of religious, simply because that's heading in the direction he wants to take. That's just my opinion. That's all. So to have rendered that superstitious is a correct. That word can mean that. Yes, it can. But it can also mean religious. And being that he doesn't talk about their superstitions, because he doesn't. He doesn't just then begin to talk about, you do this, and that's absolutely vain. You make sacrifices to Athena, that's absolutely vain. You think all these things. He doesn't do that. The way I see it, and the way I see it is complementary, and it's progressing to the next idea. That's just me, and I cannot debate a translator. I can't do that, but other translators can. And but that's the way I see it. Anyway.
Old American Standard also says very religious.
Okay. Right, and yeah, the New King James is not the only one that comes up with that conclusion that it is religious. And but thank you everybody for being here, and we hopefully will continue next week.